I was 12 years old, spending a fair amount of time at my grandmother's cabin at Pine Grove State Furnace. Pine Grove has always been haunted, mostly due to Fuller Lake, a water-filled, old, open-pit iron mine. Though the Park Service has gone so far as to send divers down to the bottom to prove that no one was killed, many people have seen ghostly horses stampeding from the old stables to the lake and into the water, making it glow a deep blue before disappearing. My story, as far as I'm aware, has never been duplicated or replicated. It involves an old iron horse that wasn't quite ready to be scrapped. I was walking back along the old railbed that runs from Laurel Lake, a man-made lake slightly larger than Fuller, at dusk in June. I did not fear being alone in the woods after dark. I knew the woods and the mountain as well as the back of my hand, just like my father did before me. It had just turned fully dark when I noticed something peculiar. It was silent, dead silent. People that are from the woods will tell you that it is almost never completely silent. There is always some critter rustling through the leaves, a cicada or cricket chirping, a great horned owl hooting its dominance. The fact that there was nothing unnerved me and made me anxious to get back to the cozy little cabin, so I increased my pace. I was more or less speed walking along this deserted silent trail. The only sound I heard was my sneakers crunching on the cinders. Tall pine trees on both sides of the trail cast shadows down on me, making it difficult to see. I was just reflecting on how dark it was when I heard a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. The long, lonesome wail of a steam whistle. I recognized it from a trip to the Strasburg Railway when I was younger. Nothing in the woods could replicate that sound. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I looked around. The place was as empty as a church on Monday. I was in the deserted part of the trail. The nearest cabin was 2 miles away in the opposite direction. I simply told myself that my mind was playing tricks on me and kept walking. Then I heard it again, and it was getting closer. A faint light appeared behind me, so faint that it was barely recognizable as a light source. I told myself that it was swamp gas. It is quite a marshy area around the trail, and that my mind was continuing to pull sound out of nothing to make up for the silence. I kept walking, thinking about fresh biscuits and wild grape jam to take my mind off of things when I noticed that the light was slowly growing brighter. I had seen swamp gas lights before. They usually only lasted moments and weren't terribly bright. The main thing that told me that it wasn't my mind was the ground. It was vibrating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight as arrows. Earthquakes weren't unheard of, but it felt and sounded like something heavy pounding the ground rather than a jarring movement of an earthquake. I was properly scared, thinking about wendigos and other supernatural monsters that lived in the woods. I stepped off the trail and crouched down by a thick pine tree, waiting for whatever it was to go by and let me go on with my business. I became aware of a slow snorting sound, making me again think of the giant 80-foot wendigos that turned people into cannibals with their touch. I also realized that the light was growing brighter, and the rumbling of the ground was slowing down. It came around a long sweeping curve at a crawl, slowing to a stop in front of me. It was a Big 6, a 2 to 10 to 2 Baltimore and Ohio operated locomotive number 6666. It hissed to a stop, its giant driving wheels resting on the bare cinders. It was shrouded in a light blue mist of steam and wore a deep black coat of paint that seemed to suck all available light into it, except the bright light of the front spotlight. The steam mist, when it hit me, turned cold. I bit hard on my knuckles, trying to control myself. 2 blue lights were in its cab, as if on cue. One hopped down and crouched in the bushes for a moment. I heard a sound of stressed steel and clack. An invisible switch had been thrown by the ghost fireman. The blue light then took the opportunity to walk slowly around this 91-foot-long, evil-looking locomotive before casually climbing back up the ladder into the cab. I then saw the firebox open, and I heard such a scream, the kind of scream you'd never want to hear again. The sound of someone being roasted alive. Almost as quickly as it had opened, the firebox door shut with a clang, and then a long, soulfully sad song of the whistle chimed again. Big Six puffed a blue cloud of steam up out of its short black smokestack as it rolled slowly across the invisible switch. It took a sharp, almost 90-degree turn, much too sharp for any real locomotive, and puffed away into the woods. The whole encounter lasted probably no more than 4 or 5 minutes, but believe me, I had seen more than enough. I did the rest of the trail at a dead sprint and didn't stop until I was in the cabin with the thick wooden door locked behind me. My grandparents, parents, and friends have tried unsuccessfully to get the story out of me, but I had never told about it until this day. The story about how I had seen one of the scrapped Big Sixes that burned people for fuel. There is an old deserted graveyard that's somewhere in Birchville, South Dakota, where people once buried their dead, but no longer due to some odd things happening there. It was once a place where the town would bury their departed loved ones from the 1880s to the early 1910s until, according to some, a few supernatural hauntings happened. Some of those who were buried at the graveyard were Lakota civilians who were massacred during the wars between the United States and the Plains Indians in the 19th century. A couple of them were Lakota warriors who died trying to defend their families. Because of this, some would venture into the graveyard at night and would claim they saw what looks like a really angry-faced dog soldier with a tomahawk and a Winchester rifle. Of course, there were some who were skeptical of the haunting, and a couple of teens from the town went to the place on a dare, as kids would do. One of the teens dared a boy to stay in the graveyard overnight, to see if he could prove himself brave, so he stayed there for a night. The next day, they had to make a search party for him since he hadn't shown up for school and his family was worried. The teens, feeling guilty and in fear, told the adults that they went to the graveyard and dared him into going in. When the townsfolk got to the graveyard, they found the boy hanging from a tree, gutted with his entrails on the ground while the top of his head was scalped. This was one of the reasons that led to the graveyard being abandoned. Another instance was a rumor about some type of devil creature wandering nearby, and that it didn't appear there until some strange-looking woman started going up there. She always appeared to carry some type of strange-looking book. There were rumors that she was a witch, and people simply dismissed the whole thing as only that, a rumor. But those who would sometimes venture there usually heard some type of cackling, and sometimes cloven hoof-shaped prints would appear in the ground and snow. No one knows what happened to the so-called witch. She disappeared just like she appeared. But the ghost of the dog soldier and the demon weren't the only paranormal sightings in the area. Some people said they could see the Grim Reaper whenever they watched someone getting buried. Sometimes, death would point towards someone, and that person would die. Sometimes, he pointed to the old, and later on, he decided to point to the younger people. In 1908, one such person was a bright and healthy kid who saw death pointing at him during his grandfather's funeral, and later on, he died in the First World War. Another man got his face kicked and trampled by a horse when he tried to ride after he saw the Reaper. Basically, seeing death at a graveyard beckoning you was always seen as an omen and also a death sentence. After that, the graveyard was abandoned and a new one was made. The old graveyard is not on the map due to all the bad luck associated with it, but there will always be people trying to look for it, and if they do, they will most likely be cursed and haunted for the rest of their lives.